Michael, do you believe, even though there's no evidence right now, that these attacks may have been coordinated?
Well, as you say, there is no evidence of coordination, but there is evidence of inspiration, meaning that part of what Daesh or ISIS has done is it has counseled or advised people who believe in its ideology to go carry out attacks. And so it's not a coincidence. It reflects a kind of commonality of ideology behind all these attacks.
Michael Chertoff, talk about France. It's been the site of many terror-related attacks.
Well, the French have a significant population of people who have immigrated from the Middle East or parts of Africa. Some part of that population, a small part, but still a significant part, is either radicalized or at least sympathetic to radicalization. And we've seen some of these people carry out these attacks, both in the Charlie Hebdo case and in what we saw today. And in fact, according to news reports, the authorities were actually monitoring one of the perpetrators of today's attack over a period of time several years ago. And I think this reflects the concern that many Western countries have that ISIS will use people who are citizens or residents of those countries as being part of the attack vector against innocent civilians.
And that makes it, Michael, much more complicated and much more difficult, I believe, to try to preempt them. So what does France do then to try to make sure that they secure the country?
Well, you're right. It's very challenging because you have a very large pool of potential terrorists. There's a limit to the resources that any law enforcement agency has. It's one of the reasons that we do pay a lot of attention to our ability to collect intelligence. You know, some of the programs that get criticized are exactly the programs that allow you to identify and spot people who may be connected to a terrorist group so you can stop an attack. But I think we're going to see more of this. And there's one other significant thing here. It was an American company that was attacked in France, and in Tunisia it was a tourist hotel. And for Americans who are traveling overseas, what that's going to mean is they have to be more and more careful that they may be at risk in third countries, and that's part of what we need to start thinking about.
Also need to start thinking about ISIS in Kuwait. Tell us about that.
Well, the attack there, of course, was on a Shia religious facility, and it's very similar to what we saw in the last couple of months in Saudi Arabia. There, the agenda is a little different. I think there, the ISIS leadership wants to provoke a fight with the Shia and create basically a sectarian war. We actually saw some of that going back almost 10 years ago when Zarqawi, who headed the al-Qaeda group in Iraq, did the same thing. He attacked Shia institutions and mosques as part of a way of striking against what he viewed as an apostate group. So we see these terrorists operating on multiple fronts, focusing on Westerners, including Americans, but also focusing on the internal battle between Sunni and Shia factions within Iraq and other parts of the Middle East.
Michael, how likely are we going to see, taking the example of what happened in Tunisia, for example, I mean, how likely could we see that happen here on U.S. soil?
Well, obviously, we've seen a number of attempted attacks in the U.S. We've seen other attacks disrupted. By the way, the notion of attacking a hotel where there are tourists is something we saw back in Mumbai in 2008.
Right.
So I do think we're going to see soft targets increasingly being targeted by the current generation of terrorists. That's not to say they won't try another big attack like 9/11, but as we've degraded them over time, I think they're finding it easier now to bring multiple attacks against multiple easier targets.
Attacks on United Nations peacekeeping troops in Somalia.
Well, that's right, too. And again, another thing we've seen is historically terrorists attack NGOs or charitable organizations because they view these organizations as potentially winning the allegiance of the local populace. And what the terrorists want to do is have a monopoly of power in the areas they control. They want to use force to intimidate, and then to the extent that there are going to be benefits given out, they want to have the ability to control the benefits and reward those who are part of their group.
And Michael, before we go, so what should be happening right now, knowing that within the last 24 hours, really, we've seen these attacks in 4 different countries. What needs to be happening now among the intelligence agencies in all of those countries, and here in the U.S. as well, and in Europe?
Well, I think the intelligence agencies need to make sure they are sharing in real time current information about people who are potential threats out there. And I think, the word is going to have to go out, and I know it's gone out here in the U.S., to people who, whether it's hotel owners or people who have other infrastructure or other kinds of public facilities, they need to make sure they've got a plan in place to raise security almost on a moment's notice. And a lot of that is not just prevention, it's a response. If somebody does wind up in a shopping mall or a hotel, you've got to have the ability with the local law enforcement to very, very quickly shut that down. Otherwise, you can have a horrible tragedy like you had in Mumbai almost 10 years ago, where the terrorists had 60 hours of mayhem before they were finally killed or apprehended.